Welcome to the Picky Girl Travels podcast, the show for Black women who want more out of life and to live it as they see fit. The message here is all about defying convention, embracing adventure, and regretting absolutely nothing. I'm your host, Adelia Aborashade of pickygirltravelstheworld.com. I think you are going to enjoy today's episode. As always, you'll know it's always a casual conversation around these parts. Mikkel, I don't even know how to frame it. So just listen, watch, you're going to enjoy it. I hesitate to introduce you because I'm like, okay, you're a master herbalist and a certified wellness practitioner. But is that how you define yourself? Because I do have some feelings about defining people by what they do. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
Okay. Yeah, it really depends on the space, but I tend to stray away from what I do unless I just speak to integrative health. I'm an integrative health practitioner, world traveler, travel addict, things like that. But yeah, I'm open to introducing myself.
Okay, so introduce yourself.
Peace, everyone. My name is Mikkel. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I am a holistic practitioner. I am a world traveler, travel addict, a content creator, and just a being who's trying to be a better human.
Okay, I can give it all that. Now, you currently call Mexico City, Mexico home. I'm curious how that happened.
It's been a journey and a really beautiful one. I left the United States in January of 2021 with the intention of coming to Mexico. I wanted to engage in more slow travel because obviously we're still, even to this day, in a global pandemic, but I was living in the South at the time and I felt like slow travel would be really dope. And I felt more COVID safe leaving the South of the United States, if that makes sense. So I started in Merida. And my intention was to stay there and just kind of start planting some roots there. But I was invited to Mexico City to go to a really nice restaurant. I'm a food lover. I am a foodie through and through. So I met a friend here. And when I booked my ticket to Mexico City, something was just like, keep going. Like, why come back? You are a digital nomad. There's no reason for you to stay in one place. You want to see more of this beautiful country. So at that point, I started kind of moving around Mexico 1 month at a time. And I eventually made my way back to Mexico City. And I stayed here for a month. And I was going to go back to Merida. And I just kept thinking, I'm going to just stay another month. And then that month ended. And I was like, I'm going to just stay another month. And eventually I was just like, can we just acknowledge that you love Mexico City and you don't want to leave here? And that is okay. So I got an apartment and I can say that I see myself being in Mexico City, at least as my home base for the foreseeable future. I love it.
Well, I understand that. I completely understand that. Okay, so you mentioned that you're a digital nomad. That's, if I think back 10 years ago, I don't think that that's a term that existed. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this was not necessarily how you envisioned your life when you thought about yourself at this age. Would I be correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you were a digital nomad in the US as well?
Not until right before I moved to Mexico. So I have had a professional career of more than 15 years that has always been in person. And when the pandemic started, March 2020, I was living in the Bay Area. I was working at a university And I had dreams of starting my own business. So it was starting to plant the seeds for that. Just given the nature of what felt accessible, kind of combined with the pandemic and some of the changes that were happening, I was envisioning the business as a more virtual based, it's a holistic wellness business that centers Black women. And so even at that point, I didn't envision myself being a digital nomad. Even at that point, I didn't envision myself leaving the United States yet. So all these seeds were being planted. And it wasn't until I just started kind of flowing and giving myself opportunity to dream my biggest dreams in the midst of all this great transition that was happening in the world and in my life, that I was like, well, what are the things I've always wanted? I love travel. I want to leave the United States. Here is this container that I've been building and planting seeds in, and like, wow, what a beautiful vehicle to be able to support this in happening. And so once those things kind of came together, I'd say it was maybe summer of 2020 when the plan really started coming together of leaving the United States and being able to take my business wherever I wanted in the world.
Okay, so you said a lot in that. There are a lot of things that I'd like to go back and dig into, particularly when you said about giving yourself permission to dream your biggest dream. Now, was that the business, creating your own business? What was that biggest dream?
My biggest dream was to leave the United States. Yeah, to either travel full time or at least create a home somewhere outside of the United States. Yeah, I can't say that when I initially started having those dreams, I thought that it was possible, which I think is why I consider it such a big dream. And even when it started coming together, of course, there were doubts, but I was like, no, this is the direction that we're moving in. And so it's been really beautiful to see it come to fruition.
Okay. All right. And one of the other things I wanted to dig into was the holistic wellness for Black women. Talk to me about that. Like, I mean, just hearing that gets me excited, but I will be the first to admit, like, I don't know a lot. I don't think I know a lot about that or what that is or what that looks like, what that could be.
Yeah, honestly, it's so varied. And just a little bit about like my professional background, I will say I've had more than a 15-year career in health and wellness that started out in sexual health and HIV prevention, and worked in that arena for a while. I think I started recognizing how intersectional something like sex and something like chronic illness could be. So looking at these other pieces that are influencing the health and wellness of my clients at that time. By the time I started having that realization, I was already at the university doing HIV prevention and sexual health work. So this growing interest in the other intersections of our lives and my own personal journey of learning how to take care of myself better and understand my needs and set boundaries and, create space in my life. Those things kind of came together simultaneously. And I was fortunate enough to shift my role at work to be more so in the holistic wellness world. So I was doing health and wellness coaching with college students, eventually primarily Black college students of color, first generation. And I think that really fueled this desire for me to dig in deeper, right? Because it's different when you're working for somebody else or when you're working in an institution that is largely impacting the health and wellness. There's a limit to the work that you're able to do. And so I vowed that if and when I were able to transition out of working in the university space, that I would just want to center on that. And that being seeing Black women, because that was something I noticed just in my many conversations with Black women and femmes, a lot of people not feeling seen, not feeling affirmed, not being uplifted, and not having a space to just share what's going on. And so those are the things that really fueled my business. Now, the business started coming together in summer of 2020, around the time George Floyd got murdered. When I first started Revolutionary Healing as a name of business, I did not explicitly say I'm working with Black women. In my mind, I'm like, oh, of course, this is like my ideal kind of person to work with. But can I say I just want to work with Black women? I don't think I can say that. Like, I don't want to just limit myself or for people to feel like they're not able to. And after George Floyd got murdered and all of the, activism and some of the conversations really started picking up, I was like, F this. I was like, I don't care what anybody has to say. I'm explicitly letting Black women and femmes know that this is a space that sees them. And of course, if anybody feels connected to the work that doesn't identify in that way, you're more than welcome. But no, this is for us.
This is a conversation that I literally just had yesterday with somebody, because I made a choice that this podcast was specific, because this was a conversation I had in my head when I started the podcast. Like, is it for women? Is it for women of color? And I had to own it. Like, no, this is for women like me. This is for Black women. And then as my business grew, I had that moment where I struggled with owning that. And I will say, and I'm curious to hear from you if you got any pushback. Like, on my YouTube channel, I do get the stray man every now and then who's like, why is this for Black women? Why is this for women? And at the same time, I get quite a few who are like, I am not a Black woman, but I'm enjoying this content. See, like, they know how to act. So I am a little bit curious, because like I said, I can totally identify with that, making that decision. Did you experience any of that where people were like, but why? Or like, but can you help me? Like, did you get that?
I didn't, and I anticipated it. I really did. And I think that was a part of what took me so long to acknowledge who I was really centering, because I just imagined just comments on social media and just all this pushback. I did not get any pushback. On the opposite side of the spectrum, I got a lot of support from people of many different backgrounds, where they were like, we need this. I'm so happy that this exists. And, I used to have more regular weekly scheduled yoga classes online. And some were explicitly for, like, I have one class that was just for queer and trans people of color. Some were, just explicitly named for Black women and femmes, but some weren't. And so there are folks that have varied identities that might come to those. And you're completely welcome, because if I am naming that this is a space that is centering Black women and femmes, and that is going to be the thread throughout my intention, the way that I market, everything, then if you are drawn to this space and if you feel comfortable here, then you're already aligned with the work that we're trying to do. So you're already good people, and I never had any difficulty with that. And I'm super grateful for that.
So you didn't get any pushback, which is great. I think that's awesome. Now, you mentioned yoga. When you talk about holistic wellness, I think to folks like me who don't really have a clue, yoga seems like an obvious choice, but I know that it's more than that.
Yeah. So even yoga itself is more than what we tend to connect with it as, like more of the movement practice. When I say holistic wellness, I mean that I'm creating a container for the folks, whether it's individual or community that I'm working with, to hold their entire experience. And so the primary ways I work with folks is one-on-one. So I'll do health and wellness coaching, which is similar to talk therapy, but different kind of approaches. And with me, there's a lot more flexibility with my health and wellness coaching certification that I can do in a session that sometimes talk therapists can't. So we can do some like deep imagery work or journey work instead of talk therapy. Sometimes we'll do movement or things like that, meditation, stuff like that. Meditation is also a part of it. And when working with groups, sometimes it's really about how do we define for ourselves what taking care of ourselves look like, right? So I think that's really important for Black women specifically, because the world tries to push a narrative about what wellness is, and it doesn't always feel accessible. Like sometimes it's very much like, oh, just take a bubble bath, or, you know, you got to take a week vacation to the, to Bali or whatever. And it's just like, that's not going to be everybody's story. So I think my approach is very much about creating space for people to connect and reconnect with their own inner wisdom, with their own understanding of what their needs are, with a higher source, whether that is spirit, God, whatever people may connect with, and support folks in finding their own understanding of what taking care of themselves look like. And that felt important to me because I didn't learn that, right? Like I have a master's in integrative health, and the way wellness was handed to me was it was a way that I was just like, this isn't necessarily my experience. So yeah, it's been really beautiful to continue learning more about what that means in a capitalist society, because that's the other pushed with wellness. The way I learned it is reinforcing capitalism. It's like, how can you take care of yourself today?
So you can get back on the hamster wheel.
Back bright and early on Monday morning. And I'm like, this doesn't feel good at all. Like, can you just rest? Like, can you just feel deserving of resting or taking care of yourself, not for work or, the system?
You said like, it didn't feel right, the way that you were given, like wellness but when I hear you speak, I'm like, okay, she gets it. She understands it. So I'm curious about like, how did you go from point A to where you are now? Was it just an evolution? Was it something you had to like purposefully seek out and to educate yourself on?
Really good question. I think as I was working at the university, and the way my role there was laid out, students could make appointments with me through the appointment system in the student health center to talk about a range of different health and wellness topics. And it was undergraduate, graduate students, all different races, genders, ethnicities. And so, of course, when Black folks come in, you're like, okay, got my Black client up in here. It's just a different type of relationship already. But what I started noticing over the years, as I more intentionally sought out to connect with and be present in more Black spaces on the college campus, I started hearing more stories. I started hearing more of what people's experiences were. And that came through in a few different ways. One, that idea of people not feeling seen, heard, affirmed, like that was rampant on the college campus I was on. So when people would share their experience, or when they would sit down and I would just ask, like, how are you? How are you feeling right now? Take a moment. You need some water, take a deep breath, just to like ground and orient them in the space. So much started coming out. So much started, just spilling out at the seams. I was like, wow, there really aren't a lot of spaces for people to just sit, for people to just breathe, for people to just take a moment. And I think the other part of what started emerging was a lot of the stories of what was impacting the health and wellness of the Black students that were coming in was directly a result of navigating a education system that wasn't created for them. So it was all of these like barriers and walls they were hitting based on not on their life and their experience not being reflected. And so I think both of those things kind of brought me to a point where I was like, the fact that I'm being paid to do wellness work in a place that is largely causing that harm, I was like, this ain't it. And so that's when the rub really started. It was when I started working with more Black students and Black folks directly that this growing dis-ease, discomfort started growing. And I was like, we need something more. We need something more than this. And it's revolutionary, hence the name Revolutionary Healing. And it's so simplistic at the same time. It's so like the type of work that we do is really about being seen, right? Like, again, going back to this, how are you doing today? What's coming up for you? Like very simple opportunities to connect heart to heart that can be really transformative in understanding and reflecting back ourselves, our experiences. So yeah, I'm still learning always more about how to better serve community and just listening, but that's really where it was born from, was just recognizing the ways we weren't being served.
Okay. And so you made the decision that you wanted to, create these spaces for this to happen. And I would imagine, did you envision it as a face-to-face kind of a thing, or because of the pandemic, it just lent itself to being online?
Yeah, I think initially I envisioned a mixture, some face-to-face, because I was seeing clients more in the spiritual space, face-to-face in the Bay Area at that time. And even though, so I had actually walked into my boss's office. We had a really good relationship, August 2019. And that was the first time that I was like, by August 2020, your girl gonna be gone. And I was like, I want to start my own business. So whether I'm part-time at that time or just fully transition out, that's gonna be my vision. I had no like real plan at that time, but I needed it to land out in the world. And so between August 2019 and March 2020, it was like a slow drip of like pulling together pieces, maybe starting to save money for my transition out of working at the university. And so it was really good timing, I think, with the shifts that were happening around the pandemic, because it was at this really instrumental time when I was defining more greatly what the business would look like, that it just made sense. And especially seeing, I'm an introvert. I also just was not super pleased with some of the ways the world was working anyways at that time. Like I was trying to advocate for my team to get work from home days at that time. And it was just like a challenge. And so I was really, really inspired by some of the scrambling when the pandemic started, as people really beautifully found ways to continue navigating that were successful. And it was like through that I was just like, we got this. Like, we can envision different ways to work and connect. And to me, I saw it more as an opportunity to be able to reach people that I may not have been able to reach. And that has been reflected. Like all my clients are all over the United States. And even some folks have moved abroad at this point. So it's that part has been really inspiring.
I guess I find it a little interesting that you were pulled to become an entrepreneur, because I guess in my head, when I think of people creating their own business, it's more driven by a capitalist ideal, but that's not what your motivation was. So like, I'm struck by that first. I am also curious, Okay, so it's March, it's April 2020. You're doing this. What do you think the future of your business was going to look like?
Oh, I honestly did not fully know. And I think that's been a protective factor for me is that I'm almost to a fault. I give things a lot of space. And I think that has worked really well for me to let things evolve as they would. Because when I first started, the thing I launched kind of with the most energy initially was an herbal wellness Etsy store where I was selling herbal products, and people really liked that. It was a really great way to connect with the folks that are in the community. And so I think initially I was like, oh, like I can do this, like that's going to be a big part of the business, and maybe working one-on-one, in the more health and wellness coaching kind of space. I think my biggest dream prior to the pandemic or when it first started was like eventually a brick and mortar place, and maybe several that could be modeled that are like community centers or something, that could be transformative. Yeah, that quickly shifted for me. Where I was like, brick and mortar. No, I'm not trying to pay anybody's rent or purchase a building. Like this work, it doesn't have to happen in a particular location. And I think that is the thing that was really driving some of the evolution. I ended up closing the Etsy store. It did not feel like the part of the work that I wanted to see grow once I got into it. Supply and demand is a really interesting thing. And even though people were really excited by it, I realized I loved making medicine and like sharing that with people, but I was not interested in keeping up with supply and demand or growing that part because my heart just wasn't in growing it. So people were like, what are you talking about? This is the part that's going to make you the multimillionaire. Like people love the herbal wellness products. This is the thing. And I was like, yeah, this is not going to be my thing though. Because I'm also trying to leave. Like by that time, I was just like, I'm also trying to leave the United States. So I don't know how that's going to work, trying to ship things out and keep that part of the work going. So I really had to give a lot of space to what it could look like. And I'm still doing that. I'm still having to be flexible because I don't want to be a stickler. I'm always evolving and I want the work to always evolve.
I always refer to myself as a bad capitalist because like scaling the business and thinking about and chasing the thing that's going to, make me all this money. I'm just kind of like, if it don't feel right, like if I'm not getting the right vibes from it, no thanks. So I definitely identify with that. Okay, so you're doing this now. How does your desire to leave the US play into all of this? I mean, because I guess you did end up creating a business that you can do from anywhere.
Yeah.
But you're still in the US. It is still the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like, how do you make that jump? How do you start getting that? Because as you said, this was your biggest dream.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, when I think back to, as I mentioned, August 2019, telling my boss I wanted to leave, part of that feels like a dream because looking back, I'm like, what was I doing? Like, I think my spirit probably knew that more was to come. So I was being prepared for the things that were coming and I had no idea. I was married at that time and not in a good marriage. And some of the dreams I had of moving abroad were like pre being married. And I kind of kept tabling, it was just kind of like with life happening.
I know all about that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just like, it went from being, well, that would be really cool to even not really thinking that it could come to fruition and just like pushing it off once it was more accessible. It just wasn't priority. So around the start of 2020, that was another thing that was shifting, was that my ex-wife and I were deciding to separate. And I knew at that time I wanted a divorce. And so as I was navigating that, and which was really challenging because you're living together, the world just stopped. You're like terrified, right? This is California. So we're like on lockdown. So you're in this space with this person that like the relationship is just like unraveling. And all these pieces of plans and seeds that you're planting, that you're kind of holding, right? Like I loved my job, but I'm also putting energy into this passion project and business. And there was a moment where I was feeling really overwhelmed. I'm like, what? I just didn't know what was happening in the world. There was just a lot of uncertainty that was stressful. And there was one moment where I was just like so overwhelmed. And I just heard this very clear message come through that was like, everything you've ever wanted could be on the other side of this, like for real. And in that moment, literally like my perspective changed, because I was just like, well, what have I always wanted? I've wanted to leave the United States. I'm so sick of like, you said you're a back capitalist. Like there was just a dread in the pit of my stomach every time I was commuting to work, every time I would see thousands of people moving this way. And then after work, everybody's going this way. And just like the whole culture, it was just in my soul. I was like, this is not for me. There has to be something more in life. And so in that moment where I realized everything I could ever want was on the other side, I gave myself that permission to let those dreams come back, to really like at that time when things were happening that people would have never thought would have happened. People were making a way when nobody ever thought they could make a way. People were working from home that nobody ever thought could work from home. I was like, well, hell, I'm going to throw my dreams in the bag too, and just be like, well, what do I envision? And I think that's really when things shifted for me, where I was like, oh, that's what this vehicle is for. Now I have a really beautiful focus, which is building this business out. I had planned to leave the Bay and spend the last part of the year in Louisiana, which is where I'm originally from, and with my family. So it was just like, oh, this really beautiful opportunity to move forward with my life. And so it was like a healing invitation, because I had felt very stagnant. I had started feeling so overwhelmed. So once that started happening, it was just like things were falling into place. And I mean, down to the fact that my last day at work was October 31st, 2020. And I don't know why I didn't take a break, but I was so excited to get my life started. The next Monday, I started with my own business, and I had what was full for me, what I wanted. I had all the clients that I wanted by the time I started that next week. So it was just like this really beautiful unfolding of events. And I think there are some days I wake up in my beautiful little apartment in Mexico City, and I'm just in awe. I'm like, how is this my life? Like, I get to talk to dope Black people all day, like take walks in this beautiful city, ride my bike, which I love to do. Yeah, and I've just created this life that I literally did not think was possible.
I mean, that's it right there. That's what we're about here on this podcast, is creating the life that you want, living your life on your terms. There are several things that you said that just made me think of something that anybody who's listening to this has heard me say a million times. The universe tends to unfold as it should. That, when you step back and you give things space, when you listen to your intuition, that whatever that voice is, and you really listen to it, because I feel I've said this numerous times, that the way we are conditioned, particularly those of us raised as women, we're trained not to trust that, not to listen to it, to dismiss it. So when you do open yourself up to it and you honor what it's saying, like the things start falling into place like they're supposed to, and the universe unfolds right in front of you.
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been interesting to see the response too. Like I do have a supportive family, and I think along the way people are kind of like, what's going on? You know, just like, what are you planning now? And simultaneously being like, wow, you know, I didn't grow up knowing people who were living abroad or like even traveling abroad. So there are so many things about my life now that I'm just like, where did this come from? Like, it's amazing when you're just trailblazing in some ways. And yeah, that part has been amazing.
See, I would say, like, yes, that part of your life fits the trailblazer moniker, but also you walked away from a good job, and, you know, and created this business that was based on something you were very passionate about. Like to me, like that's a really, really big deal. So, and you were saying you didn't know people who were like living abroad. Like I can think like nobody I saw growing up walked away from a good job. Like that's not what you did. Your goal was to try and find that and land that and hold on to it. So, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you and introduce you and your story to the people who listen to this podcast. Is here again is another example of somebody doing something which in a capitalist society looking in from the outside might look a little, you know, a little questionable, a little cuckoo, but like in doing that, you began on this path to realize literally the life of your dreams.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much, so I'm not going to say it wasn't without some fears that can come up, creep up.
Of course.
I describe it as leaving the matrix, both the idea of leaving the United States, but also becoming an entrepreneur, like working for myself. And I say that because the other people that I'm in community with who have done the same thing, there is such a different experience of life. There is a feeling like you can dream your biggest dream. Things feel more accessible, right? Like things that when you're just in the rat race and just on this path that capitalism is telling you you need to do, you need to get the good job, check. You need to do X, Y, and Z, check, you're on the path, great, you got a promotion, fantastic. When you're on that path, anything outside that feels like too great of a risk.
It's a limit in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
because go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It's kind of just given to us as this, like, it's crazy. Like, why would anybody ever want the discomfort of having to figure out where your next check or, you know, your income was going to come from? And that's the biggest concern I hear from people. When they're like at the verge of taking that leap or considering it, is just like something that's been thrown to them as a fear. But then on the other side, you're like, this is liberation. Like, I'll be taking naps in the middle of the day, y'all. Y'all don't understand.
No, because that's what I was going to say is when you start to live that kind of life, there are no limits. Like the old life, you don't really think about it being limited. However, because when you're in the matrix, when you're, you know, what's the word? Playing into convention, because around here we are about defying convention. But when you play into that, you do limit yourself and you're not completely aware of it. And it is not until you step away that you're like, wow, I did that. And really, I could do anything that I wanted. Like, there's really nothing stopping me but me, possibly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I'm coming up on a year and a half of working for myself. And I think I'm still having to shed some of those perceived limitations. That first week I mentioned where I was working for myself, I probably did like 50, 60 hours that week. Like I was just like I was just, what's the word? I was reliving the same structures of capitalism that I
You
had learned.
just took what you had before and you just transplanted it into a new place.
Yeah. And so it took a while before I'm like, wait, this doesn't feel good. What do you actually want? What is your energy level throughout the week? Like that was a big thing for me. Okay, on Mondays, maybe I want to take things a little bit slower. I start my day slower and ramp up Monday evening, Tuesday. And then by Friday, really, really low energy, manageable work or not working at all. Or maybe I take this day off in the middle of the week because I'm just not feeling it. And then maybe I'll do a little bit of work on a different day. Like being able to structure my life around how I'm feeling and my energy and what I know about myself in a more intuitive way just completely blew my mind. And I'm still, again, like unlearning some of what those patterns around work are as I continue evolving with my business.
Before you said earlier in our conversation, you said something about like, oh, you were talking about like wellness and holistic wellness, how it's simple, but at the same time revolutionary. And the act of asking yourself, what do I really want? How do I feel about this? To me, those two questions seem very, very simple, but I know from all the people I've talked to on the podcast, on the YouTube channel, from all of the clients I have had, that when I ask that question, so what do you want? People struggle answering that because in the system we've been raised in, it's not really ever about what you want. So spending time thinking about that and really gaining understanding of it, that system does not value that. You do things based off of what you should be doing, whether it's what you think you should be doing, what society thinks you should be doing, but it's rarely about what do you want? What feels right for you? And so I hearing you say that, I'm like, there it is, those two simple questions, but so powerful, I think, in unlocking, if your goal is to live your best life, to really unlock that, you've got to give yourself space to examine those questions.
Yeah, I hear a lot of guilt from people around that, wanting to think about what they really want. And I'll say this about like the healing work. I feel like some parts of it have transformed as well, because I have a YouTube channel. I started the YouTube channel when I started my business as a means to support the business. People always say you need to be on social media. YouTube's my favorite platform. So even from then, I mentioned from the first video, travel is a big part of my life. When the world opens up again, we'll talk about travel, but this is about wellness. And it's been really interesting because where the channel is right now, it's starting to grow. And it's primarily folks who are, especially Black folks, who are wanting to leave the United States. And a lot of people are at that pre-stage, like they're planning, they're thinking about it, they're considering it, they're touring around, they're obviously like looking on YouTube for support and inspiration. And the conversations that I've been able to have with people individually have been really profound in that same area around like, wow, I'm doing something I never thought I would do, which is even asking the questions of what I want and envisioning a different life for myself. And the fact that it's primarily Black folks asking this question and envisioning life outside of being Black in America, it feels like a different stage of the health and wellness and healing work, because it's still about creating that container for people to be seen, to be listened to be affirmed, And especially as someone from the other side, you know, to be like, we're out here. Like we're out here, there are resources. Like this may feel really scary, and ultimately you're going to have to kind of take that leap, but like there's a lot of support and people who have already done this. And that part has felt, it's like I would have never, ever 2 years ago thought that I would be in communication with other people who are wanting to move abroad, or other people who are like leaving toxic marriages or living life on their own terms or retiring, or like there are so many transitions in life that people are in and sharing their stories. And it's just like, it's been such a beautiful and like affirming part of the healing work right now.
That's awesome. Are you in your wellness business, are you taking on new clients?
I am not taking on new clients.
Because I know somebody listening to this is going to be like, okay, but where's her information so I can get with her? Okay, so you're not.
Yeah. So again, the evolution. It feels like, so I had the LLC, Revolutionary Healing, and it has been running as described. But at late 2021, I started working towards building a nonprofit version of the organization, because I've gotten to the stage where I'm like, yeah, Black folks need to heal. Like, we're going to create spaces, but I'm also like, we shouldn't be paying for it. Like, we should not be having to fund healing from the impacts of, you know, oppression that we're experiencing. So I'm really committed to trying to find ways to grow the work and sustain the work, so that it's accessible financially to folks. And so for me right now, that means shifting some of my focus out of the one-on-one individual work. I still work a lot with Revolutionary Healing with like organizations, businesses, corporations, in providing more group support, even like DEI work. Really, how do we look at supporting folks in a more broad way? And with the nonprofit, I'm really hoping to be able to hire eventually, and to also be able to support other small organizations that are committed to healing work in Black communities that don't have access to nonprofit. So I'm wanting to really like grow that community. And I just see myself stepping back as a direct provider of services. And after 15 years, it just feels like some of what I've learned can best be applied in more of the program planning and management. So that's how things are shifting right and shaping up right now. So it's exciting. And there's this next stage coming. But I think just I'm in the midst of this right now. So I'm very much like, I am a part of my evolution in this moment. I am feeling all the feels about winding down certain parts, like one-on-one work. There's a lot that's connected to that. I've been working in that capacity for a long time. And also, as different parts of my work grow, I gotta, you know, Spirit's like, things have to evolve. Spirit's like, I let some things go. And I think I'm like literally in that space right now where I'm like, so many things are blossoming. It's beautiful. And that also means some things are fading away, and that's challenging.
No, that's exactly how it's supposed to go. Okay, so if somebody wants to follow that evolution and they want to follow your work, where should they go to do that?
Yes. Well, I am always open to people reaching out. So my email address is info@revolutionaryhealing.org. You can also go to revolutionaryhealing.org to learn more about the work and connect with me in that way. I also have the YouTube channel and community, which is Travel Well with Mikkel. And you can email me. Well, you can just email me at info@revolutionaryhealing.org to connect. But yeah, I'm very open to, like, I'll do yoga classes for groups of folks, for businesses. I love talking with the higher ups of businesses about how to create a more supportive environment for the people in their business, especially always centering Black folks. And, you know, there are still some opportunities to connect one-on-one, but I invite you to reach out.
Well, thank you so much for coming here, sharing your story, helping us like have this conversation about wellness and what that can look like and what that can be and all of that. I really do appreciate you taking time to come and talk to us here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I really love to hear your perspective on things. And I feel like we could have very long conversations about being bad capitalists and like just the way that you see the world. So I appreciate you even having this space because I think it is an important topic and it's affirming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So was I right? Did you enjoy this episode? I bet money you did. I think our big takeaway here, or the thing that I hope you take away from Mikkel's story, is that whatever your biggest dream is, y'all know it doesn't have to be about travel, although like that was the thing for me. I wanted a life centered on travel. It doesn't have to be about living abroad, but whatever your greatest dream is, don't talk yourself out of pursuing it. Go for it. You know, we are about having no regrets. And I think that if you don't at least try, give it a try, whatever that big dream is, if you don't at least try, I think you will regret it. And we don't do that here. Okay. So that is the biggest takeaway. The other one, of course, is, you know, that little voice in your brain, your intuition. Take a moment, listen to it, embrace what it is telling you about yourself, about your life and your choices. I think if you do that, it will help you as you try to achieve your biggest dream. If you're watching this on YouTube and you have not subscribed to the channel, please do that. If you're listening to this on one of the podcast websites, apps, tools, whatever, and you have the ability to subscribe, do that. If you have the ability to leave a review, please do that. All of that helps make the podcast more visible so that other women can find it and benefit from all of the different stories that we've shared here, the different experiences we've shared. If there is a topic that you would like to have us talk about, remember, you can reach out on social media. You can leave a voice message if you use the link in the description. As always, thank you for your support. Your support has allowed me, empowered me to continue to do this, and means a whole lot to me. If you want to support the podcast in a financial way, you can do that as well, becoming a patron, donating through Buy Me a Coffee. You know, if you got it like that, great. If you don't, you can show your support by sharing this episode with a woman in your life you think it will resonate with. So yeah, until next time.